Zimbabwe has lifted its ban on maize and grain imports, reopening what South Africa's Agriculture Ministry calls a key export market for maize. Pretoria says this is bigger than mere trade. It is about food security in the region, price stability for consumers and confidence for farmers who need predictable cross-border markets. Agricultural Minister John Steenhuisen says allowing maize to move freely across the border strengthens SADC integration and helps ensure surplus-producing countries can support neighbours in need. Joining us is Hendrik Venter from South African Department of Agriculture. Jan, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for speaking to us this afternoon. Now, what exactly did Zimbabwe change under its statutory instrument 87 of 2025, and how does that allow South African producers to do today what they couldn't do a few days ago?
Yeah, so a couple of months ago, since the end of May, Zimbabwe has put a ban on exports of maize to Zimbabwe, and that was quite unexpected. It wasn't communicated beforehand with South Africa, and that is why it caused such a trade disruption. So the new lifting of the ban is therefore quite significant. We are at the beginning of our season. Obviously, there's still unpredictability in terms of our climate. We don't know if South Africa or Zimbabwe will have good rains, early rains or late rains, for instance. So that make a huge impact on food security in the region, as you previously stated. So it's 100% accurate that then, or good news that South Africa now can start exporting maize in this remaining period of time where there may be shortages coming up.
Now, the Agriculture Minister says Zimbabwe is a key market for both white and yellow maize from South Africa. Can you help us understand how big that relationship really is in volumes or rand value?
In terms of volumes, South Africa export about 18% of our total maize to Zimbabwe. That's about 460,000 tons of maize that goes to Zimbabwe, and it's either for as you said, yellow or white maize. I don't have exact figures on that, but the important part of that is if there's either drought or a food security issue in Zimbabwe, it is important that we can be able to export them freely. Also, it's about market predictability. You cannot plan these things at the last minute. So in other words, if a market trend is stable, and we know we export every year about 500,000 to 600,000 tons to Zimbabwe, then it's predictable. Deals can be closed, and we know there's enough food in Zimbabwe, and we know also South Africa has got proper trade relations. What's going on?
Now, the Minister again links this to food security for ordinary households across the entire SADC, saying predictable trade keeps staple food affordable. Paint this picture for us. How does a policy decision in Harare affect the price of pap on a table in Mtata or Giyani? Does it or does it not?
Of course it does. In other words, if there's sufficient supply, then the demand is also stable. In other words, if supply suddenly dropped because of the Zimbabwe either not producing enough or South Africa is blocked to export, then obviously the demand is higher and prices are now impacted. But also on the South African side, now suddenly South Africa sit with a surplus, which we didn't plan. So that will then push prices in the other direction. So it's incredibly important that, especially in with our neighboring countries, that we have the free trade agreement as it has been signed. Doesn't mean that now certain quotas must be implemented at some point of time. So obviously, if there's not a sufficient demand, then we will export less. But if it's suddenly blocked, then it causes a problem for the South African farmers to what to do with additional surplus, and that causes then price fluctuations.
Zimbabwe in the last few years has been known for raising all sorts of statutory instruments that have affected trade internally and externally. Are you convinced that this new measure, this reopening of trade where maize is concerned between the two countries is going to remain for some time?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think it is incredibly important for the two countries to build this trade relationship, and not only those two countries, all our neighboring countries. especially countries which are landlocked. Zimbabwe 100% I have to export all of the excess produce if I want to export to other countries besides the region through South Africa. And it's therefore important that we build a relationship that is stable and predictable, but also to ensure that the shortages in both countries are handled. Zimbabwe and South Africa are both food baskets of a region. Zimbabwe's production is increasing rapidly, and we certainly hope that they will become the food basket of a region as they were many years ago. So that certainly can help the stability in the whole of Africa. So Africa, specifically Southern Africa, is an arid region, and therefore we have to predict or have some sort of a prediction at least that there may be years that there's not sufficient food in any country whatsoever.
Now, you're Director of Plant Health, so moving grain across borders is not just economics, it also has certain risks. What checks are in place that we don't export pests or diseases into Zimbabwean fields?
Yeah, yes, indeed. Phytosanitary pests, in other words, pests that affects plants, are incredibly important. As in the whole of Africa, if we can look at the baseline of what pests are causing, they cause us up to 40% damage on crops. That on itself is a food security risk. So therefore, it's important that when two countries trade, that strict phytosanitary measures are in place. South Africa certainly will comply with Zimbabwe's phytosanitary measures, and vice versa. We will make sure that our neighboring countries or other countries in the region complies with our phytosanitary measures. And that will help us to make sure that unnecessary pests are not moved through these commodities. We all know the damage that fall armyworm caused in Africa. It came in 2016 in Nigeria, and it spread through the whole continent within a couple of years. Now, it didn't come with commodities, that was a migratory pest, but it did come with a commodity into Africa. We just don't know which one. And therefore, it's so important that we protect our borders, our sovereignty of countries, not because we don't want trade, but simply because we cannot afford more and more pests coming into our regions.
Now, as we wrap, Zimbabwe has historically been strict about GMO grain in some cycles, especially white maize destined for human consumption. Are there any GMO or phytosanitary conditions attached to this reopening that South African exporters must meet, and can we expect them at scale?
I have not studied the conditions of that. We haven't received it officially yet. So therefore, I cannot comment on that right now. But certainly, if there are any GMO conditions we have to comply with, we will certainly do that.
Okay, that's where we're going to leave that conversation. Hendrik Venter speaking to us on the lifting of Zimbabwe's maize import ban and the importance of it to South African farmers. Appreciate your time.